So Mark, this past year has been an amazing one for Star Wars. Not only did the fans help to make The Force Awakens a global success, they've also helped to raise over $10 million on behalf of Star Wars Force for Change to date. Mark's here to tell us what's happening with Force for Change in 2016. Mark?
Oh, I'm sorry, I have dialogue?
Yeah.
I'm used to just staring intensely.
A bold claim.
Hello, YouTube. Welcome to the Goblin King channel. We're here with one of the co-founders of the Grease Goblins, so for any of you guys on the main channel, he's one of them. but we're going to be doing a Star Wars video.
Star Wars is serious business. Gotta be serious.
We're going to be talking about Disney Star Wars and what all happened there. And this is going to be the first of like a 5-part series, I'm predicting. But we're going to be doing...
5-part?
Yeah, we're basically going to be doing George Lucas selling Star Wars in this first video, and then we're basically going to be going through all the build-up to The Force Awakens. Yeah, and then we're going to do the sequel trilogy, and then we'll do some of the extra stuff. The show. We'll call it the show era.
Correct.
But this man is here because I'd call him a very hardcore Star Wars fan.
What can I say?
But, yeah, so I'm not a hardcore Star Wars fan. I would say myself, I'm more a casual.
Filthy casual.
I would say I'm a filthy casual.
I grew up on Star Wars.
I mean, this
grew up on
is
Star
the fundamental difference. I grew up on Star Wars, but I grew up on the prequels, and then that's kind of my thing. I didn't really, like, my thing of, we're setting the stage for George Lucas and him selling Star Wars to Disney. I wasn't, like, in the fandom. Like, I wasn't looking up information about Star Wars. I kind of just enjoyed the prequels for what they were, and that was kind of my knowledge. So...
on the other hand, my first Star Wars movie was New Hope. Started off with A New Hope, and then I don't remember what my next one was, but I've seen every single Star Wars movie like a million times, not including the sequel trilogy. I am including Ewok Caravan of Courage and Battle for Endor.
I'm the complete opposite. I watched the prequels first, and then the originals. And when we get to the Force Awakens video, that will play a part, because my nostalgia for seeing like certain characters is not the same for people that say loved the original. Exactly. I wasn't there.
You weren't there when Yavin fell.
But I want to set the stage. So at this point, let's go back. It's 2011, 2012.
Holy cow.
It's a long time ago.
Some of Bin Laden just got gone.
Okay. And at this point, okay, George Lucas, it's been I think it's about 7-ish years since Revenge of the Sith came out, the best Star Wars movie. It's not debatable. It's not debate. We're not gonna start on this debate right now, but it's the best movie. So
that's a video for another time.
But at this point, George Lucas is in his I think he's in his late 60s at this, and he again is getting a lot of scrutiny, a lot of heat for the prequels. They were not received well.
Prequels, and then the Clone Wars movie came out, and good for the kids. I was a kid at the time, but not a lot of people liked that movie.
Yeah, see, this is the fundamental difference, right? The prequels are not viewed how they're viewed now. Like, right now, I'd say there's a good,
it's like a Renaissance era.
Yeah, like,
prequels.
There's more people that like the prequels now. I feel like people look back on them a little bit more fondly. Like, as time's gone on, we look back and like, they had a lot of good things. They had some bad things. They were solid. And that was not, at this point, what it was about. It was a very common thing to hate on the prequels. It just was. And you see it constantly with actors that were playing. Jake Lloyd, who played the younger Anakin in Phantom Menace. Life did not go well for him, but he got bullied for that role. So that just kind of is just a little bit of a show of probably what George Lucas was under because of this. So I want to ask you, Luke, since you are more of a guy in the fandom at this time.
What can I say?
Why do you think George Lucas sold Star Wars?
Okay, so he said that he was done. He wanted to move on and do some experimental films. I have yet to see any of those. I don't know if he's actually released any of them. He could have. I haven't done a lot of research into it. I just remember seeing the interview where he's like, I want to start doing experimental things and go on my own way with these different films and whatnot. So I think he was just tired of his name only being attached to Star Wars. He wanted to branch out and go into other stuff. He was known for other things before Star Wars came. So I think he was tired of Star Wars, tired of all the flack he was getting. So he's just like, let me just get rid of it.
Yeah.
Let me give it up.
I think that's a pretty good point. I think other things of why George Lucas would want to move on. Again, he was like older in age, so it's like at this point, he's in his 60s. Does he want to start up like a new trilogy? That's presumably what he was going to do if he would have kept the Star Wars name. And we do hear that he did have ideas of what he possibly could have done. But I think when you look at where George was at, like he already was kind of trying to cement his legacy. He had made basically Kathleen Kennedy. At this point, when all of this is going down, when Disney is buying Star Wars, she is like the co-producer right now for George Lucas. He was supposed to stay on for a year, and then she would take over as the sole head of Lucasfilm. And it would seem that he had a decent amount of faith in her, which I think makes a lot of sense. She was a very famous producer, just looking up movies that she had been a part of, the original Jurassic Park. She'd been a part of the Indiana Jones movies. Very successful producer.
He was pretty successful.
Yeah, let's just go with that. She was successful.
Yeah.
And then you also have George Lucas, like, handpicked J.J. Abrams. He was handpicked him to do, like, the next sequel trilogy. So,
Abrams known for Star Trek, of course.
Exactly.
A great choice for Star Wars.
So again, for I think George Lucas, I think he was fine with selling it because it was him that was establishing all the people that were going to be in power to continue
He's like building
Star
his own
Wars.
little team. He's like putting like the best of the best, of the best in here.
And we'll talk about Kathleen Kennedy further in this video, and we'll probably talk a lot about her as we go forward in the videos. But again, Kathleen Kennedy had been a producer of certain movies. She had never been like I am in charge of an entire universe. Yeah. That's a big jump to make. And that's something I don't know if George Lucas really understood, or maybe he did understand it and he just thought maybe it would work out. I would say it hasn't worked out, but that's,
understatement.
hot take, I guess. But, so that was kind of where we're at this point. I think George Lucas also probably just wanted to spend more time with, say, his family. He had been heavily involved in Star Wars at this point for a while now, so I think it did make sense for him to probably want to step away at this point. But at this point, let's set the stage for a couple other things, because they would be key to some of the actions that Disney would make, and some of the foreshadowing of maybe not great handling of Star Wars by Disney.
It's gonna break your heart, guys.
And
break your heart.
Something that I think is important to note when we talk about the Clone Wars. So I was not someone that watched the Clone Wars when I was younger. I know, Luke, you were a big Clone Wars guy.
Man. You crazy. Clone Wars #1 fan right here. Kind of.
I was not a big fan, but I know it was super popular during the time. I even looked at the ratings. Like, the ratings were really good. And we saw in September of 2012 that season 5 was, releasing. It was doing really well. So again, I want to point that out. It wasn't like Clone Wars was on a decline at this point. It was still
ramping up, I would even say.
It was definitely going in that direction. So when we see like a couple years later, or not even maybe a couple, like a year. I think it's a year later that Clone Wars gets stopped. If I go down,
March 17th,
so yeah,
2014.
So literally less than 2 years after this point, Clone Wars is going to be canceled. That is mind-boggling to think.
2014 is a bad year for Star Wars.
Yeah.
Star Wars. It's a real bad year.
I mean, the early 2010s were just bad for Star Wars.
But we'll get to it.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there.
Oh my God!
On October 30th. The world would be forever changed as Disney announces the acquisition of Star Wars for a sale of $4.05 billion in cash and stock.
He could have got more. He could have got way more.
I do think he probably could have gotten more.
He could have easily 4.06.
I mean, just think about where the fan base was at this point. People wanted more Star Wars. It wasn't like, oh yeah, Star Wars is kind of a dead franchise at this point. No.
This wasn't the early 90s we're talking. This is like Star Wars is coming back. Clone Wars is hyping things up. We're getting all these new lores. Yeah. All these comic books are coming. Like, they're unraveling all these plots.
And this is something I want to ask you, because again, I don't have this experience. I was not, I didn't even really remember that Disney bought Star Wars, at this point, when it happened. I don't remember what I was feeling, if I even knew it happened. So Luke, what were you thinking when this happened?
So honestly, whenever I first heard that Disney announced that they bought Star Wars, I honestly didn't feel like it was going to be a bad thing, but I wasn't hyped about it. I was like, okay, it's just going to continue the way it is under a new management, because, I'm still a young guy at this time. I'm a little youngster. So I'm thinking to myself, Clone Wars is still going to be going on. We're going to get new movies. I was excited for that because that's how they were blaring, Star Wars is going to be getting big now that Disney has it. So, I'm like Clone Wars is going to be going on. We're going to get more Star Wars stories and whatnot. So I was getting excited, but I wasn't too optimistic because I didn't understand what it meant when a new person. I was told new movies. I was like, oh, okay.
Yep. I mean, I think when you look at it, right, when we see that they're Disney acquires
literally everyone's reaction when Disney got it.
Yep. So Disney acquires Star Wars. And for a lot of people, like, we haven't seen a Star Wars movie in 7 years on the big screen, right? We've only had Clone Wars kind of since that point, really. There hasn't been a lot else outside of that. I think a lot of people were just excited that we were going to get more Star Wars, regardless of what they thought about Disney, regardless of whatever they thought was going on with George Lucas leaving. I think people were excited for more Star Wars. And that was the thing that I feel like Disney really propped up. This is the return of Star Wars. We're going to have more video games rebooting, like the Battlefront series. We're going to have
another thing. Like, I was thinking of the new games coming out.
A new trilogy. We're going to have all these things. It was like Star Wars is back. It's kind of how it was.
Boom, boom, boom.
And I think that Disney played this really, really well. I think they really pitched this well to the public.
Dude, they did like a Chancellor Palpatine pitching, like, give me emergency powers. Like,
and then this is the biggest thing. They really played on what people wanted to hear at this point. Because, again, people didn't like the prequel. So what did the Disney era, and I noticed this because I was always a prequel guy, and I never saw any prequel stuff for a while. It took a while for prequel stuff to start, like, creeping back into, like, video games and
Are you talking about, like, after Disney got it?
Yeah, after
Disney
Disney got it.
Within the last 3 years.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where the Disney Star Wars was like, it wasn't just a return to Star Wars. It was a return to the original.
We're bringing Harrison Ford back. Harrison Ford's coming back.
Every single one.
Every single one.
We're all bringing them all back. And it's made it very apparent. Something I've noticed, because I've already started my Force Awakens analysis, is that it's very apparent that we're returning to the originals.
It's like, you remember these guys? You like them, the member bears from South Park. I remember, you know, Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill. You like these guys.
Yeah. And we see the first draft of The Force Awakens beginning in 2013. And again, I want to point this out. George Lucas was still involved with them.
He straight up had plots written out for them. They could have gone on. Like, he gave them drafts.
And it just seems the way things fell out between George Lucas and Disney that it was kind of one of those things where it's like, Disney just wanted George Lucas to, like, go off and live in Florida and just not...
They knew what they were doing the whole time. They, like, baited George Lucas.
And it's very apparent because George Lucas was a consultant, and then he's just kind of pushed out. He's not in this role anymore. He's just like, oh yeah, let's put George Lucas's name on it, but he's not actually part of it. Yeah. It's kind of how it feels. And so basically at this point, Disney, J.J. Abrams, and Kathleen Kennedy go in a different route. The first draft only took 6 weeks to finish, which I'm not sure how in, like, writing, if that's a quick script or not, or draft, but...
I have no idea, but I imagine it was probably just, like, key plot.
Yeah,
what goes where, like,
fair enough. And I have a quote down here. This is from J.J. Abrams, and I think this is very apparent when you watch the sequel trilogy, but he says the key to the film was that it returned to the roots of the first Star Wars films and be based more on emotion than explanation. I think that's very key, because what they're talking about here is they don't want to do what the prequels did. They don't want to be explaining politics. They don't want to be explaining world building. There's a lot of things that I think are very evident when you get to Force Awakens that you would assume would be told, but just aren't. They go on pure emotion.
Yeah, there's a difference between saying, like, oh, we want emotion, not all these hard science facts, versus what Force Awakens did, where they throw you into this whole new world without any explanation of how we got here. Like, the jump from Revenge of the Sith to A New Hope, it's like a 30-year time jump, or 20-year time jump, or whatever. So it's a big time jump, but you basically get the story already from watching the one previous to A New Hope. Like, you understand, okay, Republic falls, Empire's a thing, and then A New Hope is Empire's still a thing. Like, you understand the progression. Yeah. From Return of the Jedi to Force Awakens, almost a similar time jump, time frame wise, but now you're just like, how the hell did this happen? Where did we go wrong? Like, it makes no sense.
And what I think is really interesting is, like, when you look at a movie like Rogue One, it's a movie that's not necessarily needed to understand the story, but it's inherently something that builds off of those two movies, Revenge of the Sith and then also New Hope, just adding context and adding a fun story into that. I guess it's not fun for the characters based on the way things go, but
maybe some of the characters.
It's a great movie that complements both of those. And it's one of the things I think Disney did. It's my favorite thing probably that they've done. It's my second favorite Star Wars movie. But when we get to, like, the sequel trilogy, and we're not going to get too far into it because we're going to have videos on each one of them.
It's going to be a 20-part series.
Yeah. But how did we go from the Empire has fallen, we have Luke presumably training new Jedi, we have Leia in pride control of, say, the Republic, Han Solo's, you would assume, would be with her, because they have a relationship. And then we get to my issue with Force Awakens is that the Force Awakens is inherently the exact same setup as A New Hope. It's basically like you're repeating history. The First Order is this Empire 2.0. They've somehow taken over again. They're more powerful than the Resistance. There's like no Republic checking them at this point. We see that the Jedi are gone already again. So again, we're repeating history again. It just feels like the same thing.
And like, I just want to put this out there. It's like, we know some of these explanations are in the books, but not all these books were out at the time when Force Awakens came out. And if you're going to do such big plot point elements, like as in how did the whole Republic go to the way it is, and you're going to throw that in a book, that is just lazy afterthought. That isn't, if you wanted to actually, if you thought that was important enough to show, you would have showed it, not just tell us about it in a book.
I mean,
and I love the books. I'm like older books. I like reading books. I'm just saying, that kind of big plot point element where a whole republic falls to the Empire a second time needs to be shown in a movie if you're making a movie.
And one of the things that I just find jarring is that books or things that come out should not be something that fills plot or holes or anything that's not explained in the movies. What books should be doing is complementing the stories we get in the movies, or taking a character that we maybe thought was interesting, expanding on them, or just expanding the world.
Same with like video games too, because that's the whole thing where whenever the first Death Star plans are found, we know who found the Death Star plans is Kyle Katarn, and we got that from the video games. However, in the movies, they still say to us, they've got these Death Star plans. It's like, okay, we know they got it. We don't have to worry too much about what we got it, because that's not the main focus of the story. But at least we know that someone previously, which could open up a whole new story, got these Death Star plans, versus how Force Awakens is like, we're not going to tell you how anything happened. It's just going to be like, this is all happening right now.
It's very jarring, the setup. And we're going to talk about when we get in Force Awakens, but let's continue. So we have another quote that I want to bring up that I think is very pivotal to Force Awakens and the sequels as a whole. But we're told that in early drafts that they had an issue with how do you deal with Luke. He is kind of the fan favorite of the originals. How do you deal with a character like that? And the quote specifically says, every time Luke came in and entered the movie, he just took it over. Suddenly you didn't care about your main character anymore, which I think is actually mind-boggling. It tells me that they don't know how to write characters that we would find enjoyable. Yes, Luke is going to be a character that inherently the audience is going to care a lot about. Luke is a character that's very inspirational for a lot of people. For instance, my dad was like, I think in like high school maybe, around that area, where he was a really big Star Wars fan. And Luke was a very important character to him. And I know one of his big complaints was how they treated the original characters in those sequels. And the fact that you can't even write up a compelling character just tells me a lot, because Luke, Luke should take a part of the screen, but we shouldn't just stop caring about all the rest of our characters.
I was gonna say, because if your excuse is, well, every time we brought Luke in, no one cared about the main characters, that just means you have bad main characters. Okay, if they were actually good, people would be like, oh, I like these, and I want to see how they interact with Luke. I want to see how they all connect. If you're telling me that you're like, oh, Luke's here, we don't care about the other ones anymore, that's on you for writing bad characters.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. It's like saying if the prequels, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, they didn't know how to write him because they know people will care about him more than, say, other characters.
Yeah.
It's like, no, the prequels have some very interesting characters that are expanded upon in, like, Clone Wars and stuff like that. So the fact that that's even a line should tell you a lot about the creative vision of the sequels going forward, that was an issue.
Yeah.
But I don't know. And this is when we get to one of the big, I think, warning signs if you were a Star Wars fan at this point. We get to the point where the extended universe is just not canon anymore. It's dead.
That's the moment whenever I knew fans were going to be bad. Because I see you have here, it was, so April 25th, 2014 is when the extended, so April 25th, 2014 is extended universe just doesn't matter anymore. What one was the Clone Wars? You have Clone Wars.
So Clone Wars also stopped in 2014.
2014 also
March
Clone
17th.
Wars. March 17th, 2014. So 2014 was just a bad year for Star Wars fans and any of us that actually like Star Wars more than just a casual.
Yep.
Literally, we all shit the bed at this moment. Because, like, all the comic books, all the video games, all the different side stories and shows and whatnot, all of a sudden, they're not canon. And then I remember just sitting and I was like, trying to understand. Like, I was trying to explain to my friends. I was like, the Republic Commando game, that's not canon. This is not canon. These characters aren't canon. They're like, that doesn't make any sense. I was like, it don't make no sense. You have 30, 40 years worth of stories, a whole from the 90s. The expanded. This is without this, Star Wars would have died. Because after Return of the Jedi, Star Wars was in a lull period of just only things that was keeping it around was the hardcore fans and the side stories like the books and whatnot. That's where we got some of the greatest things like Heir to the Empire with Thrawn. Like those stories kept the Star Wars universe alive. And now you're saying 2014, none of it exists anymore. None of it ever existed. None of it matters. We're going to replace everything with our own stuff. That's whenever you piss a lot of us fans off because we're like, then why would we care about these people? Because who knows if these people are going to be canon. 10 years from now, you can just uncanonize everything.
Well, this is what doesn't make sense to me, is that there are such great stories to explore with the extended universe when it comes to making shows, whether that's you can use this for inspiration when it comes to the originals, or not the originals, the sequels, how you're going to do them. You could take some plot lines from them. And then you just say, no, they don't really matter anymore. And then you give us a shit show in the sequels. That's what's mind-boggling to me.
Dude, it is like the fact that they felt like one of their statements, I remember, they're like, well, we feel too restricted with all the expanding universe. So like all these stories have been told. Well, the thing is, a lot of these stories you could tell again in a movie. Yeah. And the expanding universe, every time they release a new story, it still connects to the old ones, but sometimes it overwrites some things. Like there's like this character will actually be here instead of here, or like this plot point will kind of change. You can do that when you're making a movie because the movies take priority over the show, like the comic books and the books. So you could have still taken the original stories, changed them up a little bit for your own to make it fit your own stories, but still appease to the fans and all the other people who actually care about Star Wars. No, but instead of just canceling everything, that's just like straight up fucking just laziness. Just like, oh, we can't work with any of this. We're just gonna get rid of it all.
I think a great comparison is this because what you just talked about, one of the like most successful shows right now, and on HBO, House of the Dragon, for my Game of Thrones fans, does exactly that. It makes changes to like the story because we're not exactly sure on some things that happen. It appeases to say the fans and also a casual fan base. It's like the best of both worlds. Star Wars just did not do that. They were like, how quickly can we isolate fans? They just took the cleanest route. They literally went straight for just casuals.
Yeah, so 2013, so this is a year before, like a lot of people started to realize that they were going to go. It was a year earlier, was it in 2013, LucasArts just like stopped.
Yeah, so LucasArts, they're just gone. And then we see some other bad things happen at this point. We see that Clone Wars show is basically going to just stop. It's going to be canceled. And I think what's even a bigger insult, right? Because, again, we definitely see this campaign of Disney Star Wars going away from the prequels. The Clone Wars was kind of like the last prequel thing going at this time. It gets shut down for what reason? The Clone Wars is a very popular show.
They still had three more seasons in pre-production.
Yep. And then for Star Wars to then turn around and say, or Disney, to say, we're going to do Star Wars Rebels instead. Again, because it's around the originals. It's not about the prequels.
Guys, remember the Stormtroopers, guys? Remember?
And I think you have so many things conflicting by the time we get to Force Awakens, where I would still say, like, the casual part of the fan base is still, like, very happy about Disney having Star Wars getting more movies and stuff. But there was definitely the cracks in the armor from an early point.
I was going to say, because it's like, they really went for, we're going to buy this franchise. We're going to appease the original trilogy fans by doing only original trilogy stuff. Then a year later, they piss off everybody by saying, we're deleting the prequel canon, like, expanded universe. But we're also going to delete some of the original trilogy expanded universe. So now all the hardcore fans, all of their shit's been like removed, and the only people that are actually still kind of happy is the casuals because they're like, "Oh, more Star Wars."
But this is the other thing. It's like even the original fans they pissed off.
Yeah,
like Force Awakens. Like think about like just Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, for instance, right? Just getting more into the sequels. They straight up butcher like original characters, and there's just things that I'm just like, why did this happen? So it's like I just don't understand who Disney was trying to appease. It has to be like people that are just casual people that don't really care.
It's what they told all the Star Wars fans is that there's gonna be more Star Wars and you should be happy. But what they actually wanted to say is we're gonna be making a lot of money off you people.
Yep.
Because all they wanted to do is just they didn't care about any of the Star Wars fan. They didn't care about the Star Wars stories. They cared about the Star Wars brand, and all they wanted to do was just merchandise and market it.
I mean, even thinking about this is our next point on our little bullet point list. Who do they then sell the rights to do basically games about Star Wars?
Exclusive rights for video games for a decade.
EA, the money grubbers. It's like
One of the worst
there's
choices.
so
A
many.
company voted twice in a row worst company of the year. EA, most money grubbing people, they sell the rights or like they give the rights to exclusive games for a decade to them. That's just the biggest sign right there that all you care about is the money. That's all you care about is the money. And I get, companies care about money.
Yep.
But if you're like that, there's no, you can't even argue that they care about the fans at that point when they give
Yep.
the rights to EA of all the people.
And there's something I want to like point out as we go into this is kind of like there's not a lot else that kind of happens in 2013 after EA gets Star Wars. But again, it's building the hype that, oh yeah, we're bringing you guys back to the games you really liked, Star Wars Battlefront.
Star Wars Battlefront.
We'll get there, and probably the last video will probably be where we'll be talking about a lot of the video games and some of the shows and stuff. I have my thoughts in the first Battlefront game. I know Luke has differing thoughts, but
Yeah.
we'll get there when we get there. But I want to point out something. So we see that Star Wars Rebels launches at October 3rd, 2014. This is a couple months after Disney cancels Clone Wars, and it would be unfinished with an incomplete season 6.
And at this point, because September 2014 was the last month that any issued comic books would be still canon, like all that stuff is Legends now.
Yeah.
So going October 2014 forward, from now on, everything produced with the comics would be canon. Everything before that's now Legend. So it's like we're at the beginning of Star Wars now, basically.
Yep. And I just want to point out, just looking at some of the dates that we have, Star Wars Rebels didn't even last that long. Like, it wasn't, I would say it wasn't a popular show, personally.
In the first half, but we can get in that next video when we talk about the shows, we can explain why it got popular later on.
Yeah.
Key thing is they brought in Clone Wars era characters.
Wow, what a big shock. Like, because it only lasts April 25th, 2014, or no, sorry, October 3rd, 2014 to March 5th, 2018. That's not very long when you really think about like a new show being started by Star Wars or by Disney that was supposed to take over for Clone Wars.
Yeah, so that's what, 4 seasons?
That's, about 4.
About
I would assume
four
one every
years.
year.
Clone Wars lasted 6 years with 3 more seasons and pre-production.
It just shows massive blunders in how they were running Star Wars at this point. And that's kind of like all of the important stuff I feel like leading into Force Awakens, because I think this point is very interesting to look at, because at this point, Disney Star Wars was still kind of seen, I would say, as mostly a positive thing. Generally, I know that there were people that still didn't like them. And even when we get to Force Awakens is a movie that inherently did very well in the box office. It was something that critics kind of loved, fans loved. It seemed like we're returning to good Star Wars movies. That wouldn't age very well. But again, we're still in that period. What this video is trying to talk about is kind of the warning signs.
This is the prequel. We're in the prequels right now.
Yeah, this didn't just come out of nowhere. Like, there were obvious signs that this was bound to happen. There was mismanagement before even the trilogy started for the sequel.
Just setting the stage for the impending doom
Yes.
of The Last Jedi.
And we'll be back. We're not hitting Last Jedi yet, thankfully, because I'm not looking forward to researching for that movie. But we're going to be doing Force Awakens. I don't know how long, maybe a week or two, maybe. I don't know. Depends how long it takes me to get through that whole movie. But yeah. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the first part of the rise and fall of Disney Star Wars.
Bye.